Honey, I tried using your mother's debit card and it got declined. I was humiliated in front of everyone. Tiffany's voice screeched through the phone as if she were the victim of some grand injustice. She didn't realize I was sitting right beside Marcus, her husband, my son, when she made that call. Nor did she know that every false word she uttered would be the last straw in a long, painful chain of lies. From the living room, I sipped my tea and watched my son's expression shift. Confusion, disbelief, and then that quiet, familiar disappointment that now lived between us. He ended the call without saying a word. 20 minutes later, the front door burst open. "Mom, explain this right now." Marcus stormed in like a thundercloud, fists clenched, anger spilling out of him. Tiffany followed close behind, her eyes red from what I assumed were manufactured tears. She blocked her card on purpose to embarrass me. The cashier thought I was stealing. Tiffany wailed, playing her role like an actress desperate for an encore. I sat calmly in my armchair by the window, too tired to match their storm. "Is it true?" Marcus demanded. "Did you really block your card knowing Tiffany was going to use it?" His voice carried more accusation than curiosity. To him, I wasn't his aging mother anymore. I was the problem. I wanted to explain everything. To tell him about the months of deceit I'd endured, the privacy I'd lost, the boundaries Tiffany had bulldozed with her fake smiles and prying eyes. I wanted to show him the proof, the things I'd collected quietly like evidence for a trial I never asked for. But before I could utter a single word, the front door opened again. "Good afternoon," said a man in a firm, professional tone. "Mrs. Hill, I've arrived as we discussed." Marcus turned toward the voice, and the color drained from his face. Tiffany froze mid-sob. The air grew thick, heavy with the weight of what none of them yet understood. To explain how we reached that moment, the shouting, the disbelief, the betrayal, I have to take you back 6 months. To when it all began with one simple phone call from the son I thought still loved me. Backhand index pointing right rehook. If only I had known that saying yes to that call would be the beginning of the darkest chapter of my life. It all began 6 months earlier, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The house was still, as it had been since my husband, Robert, passed away 7 years before. I had finally learned to live with the silence, the kind that lingers like a ghost but eventually becomes a strange kind of comfort. I was 69, retired and proud that I'd built a peaceful life. Mornings were for coffee and crossword puzzles, afternoons for soap operas and embroidery. My savings were steady, my mortgage long paid off. The little house Robert and I built in Oakwood Heights was more than bricks and paint. It was safety, stability, mine. Then the phone rang. "Mom, I need to ask you for a favor," Marcus said, his voice tight. "The landlord raised the rent. We can't afford the apartment anymore. Tiffany and I just need to stay with you for a couple of months. Just until we find something cheaper." My heart softened instantly. Marcus was my only child, my life's work, my reason for everything. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied without hesitation. "This is your home. Come whenever you need." 3 days later, they arrived, not with small bags for a short stay, but with 4 suitcases, 6 boxes, and a sense of entitlement I ignored because love blinds you to warning signs. Marcus gave me a quick hug before vanishing to carry more boxes. Tiffany smiled politely, kissing my cheek like it was an obligation. "Thanks for having us, Mrs. Hill," she said, using my first name instead of Mom. I brushed it off. Maybe she just wasn't comfortable yet. The first few days were fine. Marcus worked long hours, barely speaking at dinner. Tiffany stayed home, supposedly job hunting, though I often caught her scrolling endlessly on social media. Still, I told myself it was temporary. Then came the small requests. "Could you turn down the TV? I'm on an important call." "Do you always cook with so much oil? That's really unhealthy." Tiny criticisms that poked holes in my peace. I apologized, adjusted, swallowed my pride. The way mothers always do. But each day my house felt smaller. My presence less welcome. And the first real crack came one afternoon when I found Tiffany in my bedroom, holding my bank statements like they were her property. Backhand index pointing right rehook. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just a guest in my home. She was planning to take it from me. When I stepped into my bedroom that day and saw Tiffany standing there with my private papers in her hands, something deep inside me shifted. What are you doing in here? My voice came out sharper than I intended. Tiffany turned, completely unfazed, holding my bank statements like she was inspecting the weather. Oh, I was just looking for a phone charger. I thought you might have one in a drawer somewhere. My pulse thudded in my ears. You were reading my financial documents. She tilted her head, all mock innocence. Relax, Mrs. Hill. It's not like I'm stealing. Besides, Marcus is your son. He technically has the right to know what's going on with the family's finances. That word families cut deep. This house is mine, I said firmly. Everything in it belongs to me. Please leave my room. Her eyes went cold, a thin smile stretching across her face. Suit yourself. But one day, all of this will belong to Marcus anyway. So what's the big secret? That night, I tried to tell my son what had happened. He barely looked up from his phone. Mom, I'm sure it's a misunderstanding, he said. Tiffany wouldn't do that. It wasn't a misunderstanding. I saw her with my own eyes. Maybe she was just curious. You always overreact, Mom. I wanted to scream. Instead, I whispered. You used to listen when I spoke. He sighed, annoyed. Please don't start. We're just trying to live in peace here. And with that, he walked away, leaving me in a silence that hurt more than shouting ever could. The weeks that followed blurred into one long nightmare. Tiffany no longer bothered pretending to be kind. She rearranged my furniture, threw away things that mattered to me, and filled my kitchen with groceries I didn't ask for, all on my dime. One afternoon, she came in with that same condescending smile. Mrs. Hill, could I borrow your debit card? I'll do the grocery shopping for you. I can handle my shopping just fine. Don't be ridiculous. You take forever. When I refused, her voice turned sharp. You don't trust me? I'm your daughter-in-law. No, I said evenly. You're my guest. And my card is mine. Her eyes flared. You're a selfish old woman. No wonder Marcus says you're impossible to live with. That night, I cried until I couldn't anymore. My home, the place that once felt safe, had become a cage. Backhand index pointing right rehook. But what I didn't know then was that Tiffany wasn't just invading my privacy. She was setting the stage for something far darker. After that night, I realized crying wouldn't save me. I had been kind, patient, and forgiving, and it had only invited cruelty. Tiffany's sneers echoed in my mind, but beneath the hurt, something colder began to grow. Resolve. The next morning, I took a bus to the bank. I'd like to block my debit card and get a new one. I told the manager. And please set up phone verification for every transaction. He looked up from his computer, concern written all over his face. Are you having problems, Mrs. Hill? Let's just say I'm taking precautions, I replied, forcing a smile. By then, Tiffany's behavior had turned brazen. She stomped around the house like she owned it. She invited friends over, criticized my cooking, even commented on my clothes. Marcus noticed nothing, or pretended not to. He was a ghost in his own marriage, caught between guilt and denial. Then, one afternoon, I found my neighbor Brenda leaning over the fence, waving me over. You look tired, Doris, she said softly. Is everything all right? I hesitated, but her kind eyes disarmed me. The story poured out. Tiffany's intrusion, Marcus's blindness, the way I felt like an unwelcome guest in my own home. Brenda sighed. My daughter and her husband did the same thing to me years ago. Said it would be for a few months. It became 2 years of hell. They tried to take my house. Ich zerrte her, stunned. What did you do? I called the police and kicked them out. It broke my heart, but it saved my life. She pressed a business card into my hand. This is the lawyer who helped me, Avery Brooks. Call him, before it's too late. That night, while Marcus and Tiffany slept, I sat at the kitchen table with the lights dimmed and dialed Avery's number. I expected to hang up before leaving a message, but instead, I said everything. The lies, the fear, the invasion. My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. He called back the next morning. Calm, professional, but kind. Mrs. Hill, everything you've described gives you the legal right to remove them. But first, you need evidence, recordings, photos, documents. Gather it all. Protect yourself. So I did. I bought a small security camera and hid it in my bedroom. 2 days later, I watched the footage, and my heart turned to ice. Tiffany had entered my room again, rifled through my drawers, and took photos of my papers. That was when I knew. This wasn't just disrespect. It was theft in slow motion. Backhand index pointing right rehook. And soon, I'd learned that Tiffany's greed ran even deeper, straight into my bank accounts. The camera footage confirmed what I already feared. Tiffany wasn't just nosy. She was dangerous. She had photographed my financial documents and even tried to open my small safe. I sent the evidence to Avery, who immediately began drafting eviction papers. Then one morning, the bank called. "Mrs. Hill, did you authorize a change of beneficiary on your savings account?" My stomach dropped. "No, absolutely not. The request came from an email linked to your account," the manager explained. The new beneficiary's name was Tiffany Reed. I gripped the phone so tightly my hand ached. Tiffany had tried to make herself my heir. My voice steadied with cold clarity. "Please lock down every account. No changes without my in-person approval." I hung up, shaking but strangely calm. I had all the proof I needed. That night, I overheard them whispering in the hallway. "She's stubborn," Marcus muttered. "We don't have time," Tiffany hissed. "If she doesn't sign the house over, we'll lose everything." My son's reply broke me. "You're right. I'll talk to her tomorrow." The next morning, I set my trap. I left the old, blocked debit card in my wallet where Tiffany would find it. And of course she did. The bank called within hours. There had been a declined purchase for $1,200 at a boutique downtown. When Marcus stormed into the house later, demanding answers, I was ready. Tiffany cried and accused me of setting her up. I calmly told them about the cameras, the recordings, the fraud attempt, and the lawyer. Her face drained of color when I mentioned the police. Moments later, Avery arrived at the door, with 2 officers at his side. The look on Marcus's face said it all. He finally understood who he'd been protecting. "Mrs. Hill," Avery said firmly, opening his briefcase, "the eviction order is ready. You just need to sign." Tiffany screamed, Marcus begged, but I didn't waver. "You have 24 hours to leave," I said. "And be grateful I'm not pressing charges." They left the next day, silent, defeated. I stood by the window as their car disappeared, and for the first time in months, the house was truly quiet. Not the tense silence of fear, but the gentle kind that comes with peace. That night, I brewed a cup of tea and sat by the window where it had all begun. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a survivor, a woman who finally chose herself. Backhand index pointing right rehook, epilogue style sometimes. Protecting your peace means letting go of the people you love most. And though it hurts, the silence that follows can be the sweetest sound of freedom. Weeks passed before I truly understood what peace felt like. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It came quietly, like a soft breeze moving through an open window. The first morning alone, I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table. The same place where I'd once cried over betrayal. But this time I smiled. No arguments. No slam doors. Just the rhythmic tick of the clock and the comforting smell of home. Brenda came over with warm biscuits, and that knowing smile of hers. "You did it, Doris," she said, patting my hand. "You took your life back." "Sometimes it still feels wrong," I admitted. "Like I failed as a mother." Brenda shook her head. "No, you didn't fail. You finally taught your son a lesson no one else could. That love isn't a license to abuse someone's kindness." Her words settled in my chest like sunlight after rain. Days turned into weeks. I joined a small group at the community center. Women my age who had all survived something that tried to break them. We embroidered, drank tea, and shared our stories. I wasn't the only one who had opened her home to wolves disguised as family. 1 month later, my phone rang. It was Marcus. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. "Mom," he said softly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted to tell you I'm sorry. Tiffany and I are no longer together. I've started therapy. I needed to understand how I became that man." For a moment, I couldn't speak. His voice no longer sounded entitled. It sounded small, human, broken. "I hope you keep getting better," I said. But I can't open that door yet, Marcus. Not until I can trust you again. I understand, he whispered. And I'll wait as long as it takes. When I hung up, I felt tears fall, not of sorrow, but of release. Maybe one day, forgiveness would come. Maybe not. But for now I had my peace. That evening, I walked into the garden Robert and I had planted decades ago. The roses were blooming again, defiantly alive after months of neglect. I knelt, touched the petals and whispered, I did it, love. I finally chose myself. Backhand index pointing right rehook, closing reflection, and sometimes that's what survival really is. Not revenge, not anger, but the quiet courage to say, I am enough and I am free. 3 months after Marcus left, life began to stitch itself back together, one quiet morning at a time. I no longer woke up bracing for conflict. Instead, I opened my eyes to sunlight streaming across the quilt Robert and I had bought on our 30th anniversary. The house that once felt haunted by anger now breathed again. I filled my days with small joys. I joined a senior dance class, the kind Robert used to tease me about, saying I had 2 left feet. The first few lessons felt awkward, my body stiff from months of tension. But then, one Friday afternoon, the music began to sway, and something inside me loosened. I twirled, laughed, and for the first time in years, didn't care who was watching. At the community center, I met women who carried their own scars. Some had lost children, some their homes, others their sense of worth. Yet, around those plastic tables and mugs of instant coffee, we discovered something powerful. We were survivors, not victims. One woman, Maria, said to me, the hardest part isn't kicking them out. It's forgiving yourself for waiting so long. Her words hit deep. I had spent weeks wondering if I could have stopped everything sooner, if I should have seen Tiffany's cruelty before it grew teeth. But guilt, I realized, was another kind of prison. I started tending my garden again. Each flower I planted felt like a small promise to myself. Life goes on. The air smelled of lilac and fresh soil, and for once, the world felt wide and possible. Then, one afternoon, Marcus came by unannounced. Not to move in, not to ask for money, just to return a few of Robert's old tools. We stood on the porch, 2 people learning to speak again. I'm working now, he said quietly. And I'm trying to be better. I nodded, unsure if forgiveness had arrived but certain that resentment had finally left. That's all any of us can do, Marcus. Try to be better. When he drove away, I didn't cry. I simply watched the sunset, golden and endless, spilling across the garden like a promise of peace. Backhand index pointing right rehook. Final reflection, sometimes the greatest victories don't roar. They whisper. And in that whisper, you finally hear yourself say, I made it through. Seasons changed and with them, so did I. Winter melted into spring, and my home, once filled with shouting and tension, now sang again with life. I opened my windows wide, letting in the scent of jasmine and the sound of birds that had stopped visiting months ago. It felt strange at first, to laugh without guilt, to cook just for myself, to sit in the living room with no fear of judgment or invasion. But slowly, the strangeness faded, replaced by something softer, contentment. I began volunteering at the local library on Tuesdays. Helping children pick out books reminded me of the days when Marcus was young, when he'd beg me to read just one more story. I still missed that version of him, the boy who looked at me like I was his whole world. But I learned to accept that people grow in directions we can't control. Some come back to us changed, some never do. One Saturday morning, Marcus stopped by again. This time, he brought coffee and 2 croissants from my favorite bakery. Peace offering, he said shyly. We sat in the garden, the one Robert and I had planted decades ago. Marcus looked older, gentler. Mom, he began. I know I can't undo what I did, but I'm grateful you didn't give up on me completely. Tears welled in my eyes, but this time, they were not from pain. I didn't stop loving you, Marcus. I just learned to love myself, too. We talked for hours, not about the past, but about what came next. He told me he'd joined a local repair shop, trying to rebuild his life one honest paycheck at a time. When he left that afternoon, he hugged me, not out of obligation, but out of real warmth. After he drove away, I sat alone in the fading light, listening to the wind move through the flowers. It whispered through the leaves, gentle and reassuring, like Robert's voice from somewhere far away. You did it, Doris. You found your way home again. I smiled, closing my eyes. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't haunted by what had been lost. I was grateful for what remained. Backhand index pointing right rehook. Final closure, and maybe that's what healing truly means. Not erasing the pain, but learning to live beautifully after it. It's been nearly a year since the day I stood by the window and watched Marcus drive away. In that time, the house and I have both healed. One creaking floorboard, one blooming rose at a time. I've learned that peace doesn't always arrive as joy. Sometimes it begins as quiet. The kind that lets you finally hear your own heartbeat again. Life has become beautifully ordinary. I wake early, make breakfast, and tend to my garden. I planted lavender where Tiffany once threw away my old pots. And now the purple blooms line the fence, soft and fragrant. Neighbors stop by more often now, not out of pity, but because they say my laughter makes the street feel alive again. Every Thursday, I meet Brenda and the other ladies at the community hall. We bring cookies, share stories, and remind each other that age doesn't mean weakness. It means we've survived more storms than most people will ever understand. Sometimes I still think of Marcus. He visits now and then, never unannounced, always respectful. We talk about books, recipes, and sometimes about Robert, the man who taught both of us that dignity is worth protecting. We don't dwell on the past. The wounds are still there, but they've stopped bleeding. That's enough. One afternoon, Marcus brought an envelope. Inside was a photograph, him volunteering at a youth center, smiling genuinely for the first time in years. You helped me remember who I was, Mom, he said. I kept that picture on the mantle beside Robert's, a quiet symbol that even broken things can be repaired. Now, when I sit on the porch at sunset, watching the sky blush pink and gold, I realize something. Strength isn't loud. It's the act of standing your ground when no one else believes you. It's finding peace after chaos and daring to love yourself again. I once thought my story ended when I lost the people closest to me. But it turns out, it was only the end of a chapter. The one that made way for the life I was always meant to live. Backhand index pointing right final rehook. Closing line because even after betrayal, heartbreak, and silence, there's always another sunrise waiting just beyond the storm. A full year has passed since the house fell quiet again. But this time the silence isn't heavy. It hums with calm, like a familiar lullaby I'd forgotten how to hear. The garden is alive. The roses Robert planted decades ago bloom brighter than ever. Their scent drifting through the kitchen window as I make my morning tea. Each petal feels like a promise kept. Proof that even things once neglected can return stronger than before. I've found new rhythms. Tuesdays I volunteer at the library. Fridays I dance at the senior center, laughing when my feet trip over the beat. Sundays I rest. I sit in the sunroom with a book, the light spilling over me, and I think about how far I've come from the woman who once whispered apologies in her own home. Sometimes I still think of Tiffany, though never with anger. Pity maybe. People like her live chasing what they can't earn. Mistaking control for love, greed for security. I've forgiven her, not for her sake, but for mine. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't permission to return. It's freedom to move on without bitterness. Marcus calls every week now. His voice sounds different, grounded, humble. We talk about small things. The weather, his new job, the book I'm reading. Once he said quietly, "You saved me by letting me lose you." And I understood. Sometimes love has to break before it can grow honest. Last night I found one of Robert's old letters tucked inside a cookbook. His handwriting was steady and strong. If life ever feels too heavy, Doris, remember you were the light that kept us going. I smiled through tears. Maybe he'd known even back then that I would need to be reminded, that someday I would have to carry that light on my own. As I sit by the window now, the evening sun painting the walls gold, I realize I'm not lonely anymore. I'm simply alone, and there's a world of difference between the two. Sparkle's final reflection. Some stories don't end with grand gestures or reunions. They end with peace, quiet, steady, and entirely your own. That's what I found. The light that stayed long after the storm was gone. Sometimes I wake before sunrise and just sit in the stillness, wrapped in my robe, holding a cup of tea that cools too quickly. The air is quiet except for the faint rustle of leaves outside, and for those few minutes, the world feels completely mine. A year and a half has passed since Marcus and Tiffany left my house. Their absence no longer feels like an open wound, more like a faded scar that tells a story without pain. I've stopped replaying those arguments in my head, stopped wondering what I could have done differently. The truth is, I did what I had to do. Every morning now, I write in a small notebook that Brenda gave me. She called it a gratitude journal. First, I thought it was silly, but now it's the first thing I do each day. I write about the smell of coffee, the way the sunlight hits the kitchen floor, the sound of children playing down the street. Little things that remind me life doesn't need to be perfect to be beautiful. Marcus visits once a month. We don't talk about the past, not because we're avoiding it, but because it no longer defines us. He's learning, growing, and I see flashes of the boy he used to be. There's still distance, but there's also something softer between us now. Mutual respect. As for me, I've learned to love solitude. It's no longer loneliness, it's peace. I spend my afternoons tending my roses, humming old songs Robert used to love. Sometimes I even dance a little in the garden just for him, just for me. Last week I found one of Marcus's childhood drawings tucked inside a book. A crayon sketch of our family, him, Robert, and me, all smiling beneath a crooked yellow SUNI in his uneven handwriting. It said, "Home is where Mom is." I placed it on the fridge and stood there for a long while, smiling. Maybe that's what all of this was about. Not losing a home but reclaiming one. Not just the house but myself. Sparkle's final reflection. Life isn't about returning to what was lost. It's about growing into what was waiting all along. And sometimes the quiet you feared most becomes the peace you were meant to find. It was a bright spring morning when the knock came at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. The garden had just begun to bloom again, and I was pruning roses when I heard it, soft, hesitant. On the porch stood a woman I didn't recognize. Mid-50s, eyes swollen from crying, hands twisting the strap of her purse. "Mrs. Hill," she asked quietly, "your neighbor Brenda said I should talk to you. My daughter and her husband just moved in with me. They said it was temporary, but..." Her voice cracked. "I think they're trying to take my house." For a moment I simply looked at her. I saw in her the same fear I once carried, the shame of being used by your own family, the disbelief that love could turn so cruel. I led her inside. "Come sit," I said, pouring tea into the same cups that had once trembled in my own hands. She began to talk, haltingly at first, then faster, words tumbling out like a confession she'd been holding too long. I listened, every detail echoing pieces of my past. When she finished, she whispered, "I don't know what to do." "You start," I told her softly, "by believing that you deserve peace." She looked up, startled. I smiled. "And then you protect yourself without guilt. Call this man." I handed her Avery Brooks's card, the same one Brenda had given me long ago. "He'll help you. But first, promise me something. Don't confuse love with permission to be hurt." Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded. We sat there quietly, the kettle still steaming between us, and for the first time in a long while I realized the circle had closed. When she left, she hugged me tightly. "Thank you, Mrs. Hill. You have no idea what this means." "Oh, I do," I said, watching her walk down the path lined with lavender. "Ido." That evening, as the sun dipped low and the air smelled of warm earth and peace, I looked around my home, my safe, quiet, hard-won home, and felt something new: purpose. I had spent months reclaiming my voice, my space, my life. Now I could use that voice to help someone else reclaim theirs. Sparkle's final reflection. Because survival is only the beginning. The true victory comes when you take the light you fought to keep and use it to guide someone else home. Months passed after that morning with the woman on my porch, yet I still thought of her often. I never asked what happened next, but deep down I believe she found her way. Because sometimes all a person needs is to know they're not alone. Word must have spread quietly through our small neighborhood. Soon women began stopping by my garden gate. Some bringing homemade cookies, others pretending to admire the roses but staying to talk. Each story sounded achingly familiar. Grown children taking advantage, relatives manipulating trust, friends overstaying kindness. I listened. I shared my story when they were ready to hear it. Not the version full of anger or humiliation, but the one about survival, dignity, and rediscovering peace. I told them about Brenda, about Avery, about the moment I realized love means nothing without respect. And every time I finished, I saw a spark, faint but steady, in their eyes. That's when the idea was born. Brenda and I started a small weekly group at the community center. Second Chances, we called it. We brewed coffee, set out folding chairs, and left the door open for anyone who needed to walk through. First it was just 5 of us. Then 10. Then 20. Women came from neighboring towns, widows, single mothers, grandmothers, each carrying stories that mirrored ours. The laughter that filled that room was the kind that only comes from people who have known silence too long. Marcus visited one Thursday. He stood quietly in the back of the room, listening as we spoke about boundaries, self-worth, and forgiveness. Later, as we walked to the parking lot, he said, "You've turned pain into something beautiful, Mom." I smiled. "That's what pain is for, Marcus. It teaches you to grow or to guide. Sometimes both." He nodded, eyes glistening. For the first time in years, I saw not the boy I lost, but the man he'd finally become. That night, I sat by the window, the same window where my story had begun, and looked out at the soft glow of porch lights down the street. The world felt wider now, filled with stories just like mine, all connected by invisible threads of courage. Sparkle's final reflection. When one woman stands up for herself, she gives others permission to do the same. And that's how healing moves, not in silence, but in ripples that reach far beyond our own front doors. It happened one evening in early autumn, just as the air began to cool and the first leaves turned amber. Brenda called to tell me that the community center wanted to host a Voices of Courage event, a gathering where women could share their journeys of resilience. "They want you to speak," she said. I laughed nervously. "Me? Oh, Brenda, I'm no public speaker." "You're more than that," she replied. "You're living proof that standing up for yourself can change everything." I wanted to refuse, but that night, as I sat by the window with a cup of tea, I thought about the woman who had once knocked on my door, trembling and lost. I thought about the faces that now filled our Thursday meetings, faces that smiled a little wider each week. Maybe I realized this wasn't about me at all. Maybe it was about showing others that they could find strength too. So I agreed. The night of the event, the hall was filled with people. Neighbors, friends, even strangers. I stood at the podium, my hands trembling just enough to remind me I was still human. Then I took a breath and began. "I once thought losing everything meant my story was over," I said. "But it was only beginning. I lost my peace, my trust, my sense of safety, and in rebuilding those things I found myself." The room was silent except for the occasional rustle of tissues. I spoke of boundaries, forgiveness, and the quiet power of choosing yourself even when it hurts. When I finished, the applause felt less like noise and more like a wave of warmth, a shared heartbeat of women who understood. Afterward, people came up to thank me, some with tears in their eyes, others with smiles full of recognition. And in that moment I realized something. I hadn't just survived. I had evolved. That night, as I walked home under the glow of streetlights, I felt Robert's presence beside me. Not as grief anymore, but as pride. The garden waited for me, peaceful and fragrant, a reflection of everything I'd reclaimed. I sat down on the porch steps, looked at the stars, and whispered, "I found my voice, love, and I used it." Sparkle's final reflection. The strongest voices aren't always the loudest. Sometimes they're the ones that rise quietly from brokenness, steady, clear, and impossible to silence. Years have passed since the night I stood on that stage and spoke my truth. The seasons have turned many times since then, each one gentler than the last. My hair is whiter now, my steps slower, but my spirit feels lighter than it ever did in my youth. The house is still mine, the garden still blooms, and the peace I fought so hard for has never left. Sometimes I sit in my favorite chair by the window and reread the notes people have sent me over the years. Letters from women who heard my story at the Voices of Courage event or read about it later in the local paper. Some wrote to thank me. Others wrote to say my story gave them the courage to finally say no. It humbles me every time. I never set out to inspire anyone. I just wanted to survive. But maybe that's how real change begins. One act of self-preservation that teaches others they can do the same. Marcus visits often now. He brings me flowers from the farmer's market, sometimes tulips, sometimes daisies. We talk easily, the awkwardness long gone. He always helps me tend to Robert's roses, And when we pause to rest, he says, "You were right, Mom, love without respect isn't love at all." We never mention Tiffany. There's no bitterness left to feed. Forgiveness, I've learned, doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing peace over poison. My Thursday group at the community center has grown into something far beyond what Brenda and I imagined. Younger women join us now, daughters, granddaughters, neighbors, all sharing stories, laughter, and the kind of sisterhood that only pain and healing can create. Sometimes they call me Miss Doris, sometimes Mama Hill. I don't mind either. I see a bit of my old self in each of them, the woman who stayed silent for too long, then learned the power of her own voice. In the evenings when the garden glows beneath the last light of day, I often think of Robert and whisper, "I did what you taught me, love. I stood tall." And in that quiet moment, surrounded by flowers that have outlived grief, I understand. Survival was never the ending. It was the foundation for peace, for purpose, for the legacy I'll leave behind. Sparkle's final reflection. And when my story ends, I hope it reminds someone out there that it's never too late to begin again. And to become your own kind of strong. Spring came early this year. The magnolia tree outside my window burst into color before winter had even said goodbye. I took it as a sign that life, even after everything, always finds a way to return. The mornings are my favorite now. I move slowly through the house, each step soft against the wooden floorboards Robert once polished by hand. The walls no longer echo with anger or sorrow. They hum with warmth. The photos on the shelves, Robert smiling in the garden, Marcus holding a fishing rod as a boy, no longer sting when I look at them. They make me grateful. Marcus visits every Sunday. He brings his daughter Emma, my granddaughter. The first time she toddled through the front door, giggling, the house seemed to exhale. She toddled toward the roses and I thought, maybe this is what healing really looks like, laughter blooming where pain once lived. He and I still talk about everything and nothing. Sometimes we sit in silence and that's enough. I see in him the man he fought hard to become. Kind, patient, steady. The past still exists but it no longer owns us. My Thursday group at the center is still thriving. Brenda says I should write a book about all the women who found their voices there. Maybe I will. Maybe these words will help someone long after I'm gone. The way Brenda once helped me. In the evenings I sit on the porch with Emma curled in my lap, watching the sky turn gold and rose-colored. She asks me to tell stories and I always begin the same way. Once there was a woman who forgot how strong she was, until life reminded her. She never asks if that woman was me. Maybe one day she'll know. The world feels small and full all at once, the way it only can when you've made peace with it. I don't need grand endings anymore. I've learned that real happiness is quiet. It's the sound of birds at dawn, the rustle of leaves, the heartbeat of those you love close by. Sparkle's final reflection. And when my roses bloom again next spring, they'll stand as proof that even after storms, life continues, tender, resilient, and beautifully alive. My dear younger me, I can still see you. Standing in that kitchen years ago, your hands trembling as you held the phone, trying to understand when love had turned into something that hurt. You blamed yourself for too much. You thought if you were patient, kind, and forgiving enough, they'd see your heart. You thought sacrifice was love. But here's what you didn't know. Love without respect is just noise, and silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means you've forgotten your own voice. You were so afraid of being alone that you let people stay who chipped away at your spirit. You mistook endurance for strength. But one day, oh one day, you'd learn that real strength is walking away even when your heart wants to stay. You'd cry until the walls themselves felt heavy with your sorrow. You'd question everything. Motherhood, kindness, even your worth. And yet you'd rise. Slowly, quietly, beautifully. You'd find new friends, build new rhythms, and plant flowers where cruelty once grew. You'd discover that solitude isn't loneliness. It's freedom. You'd even forgive, not because they deserved it, but because you did. You'd stand before a room full of women one day, telling them your story. Your voice would tremble at first, but then it would steady, not because you stopped being afraid, but because you spoke anyway. And when you'd sit on your porch years later, holding your granddaughter's tiny hand, you'd realize you became the woman you always needed, gentle, wise, and unbreakable. So if I could whisper through time, I'd tell you this. Don't dim your light to keep someone else comfortable. Don't apologize for taking up space in your own home. Don't wait for permission to protect your peace. You will lose people you thought you couldn't live without, and you will live. You will bloom again, softer but stronger, like roses after a long winter. And when you finally find stillness, you'll understand. You were never weak. You were just waiting to remember who you were. With love, the woman you became. Sparkle's final reflection. And so her story didn't end, it settled. Quiet, whole and radiant. Not with revenge or regret, but with peace. Because sometimes the greatest victory is simply coming home to yourself. The house feels different now. The air is still, but it's not empty. It's full of memory. The scent of lavender still lingers in the curtains, and the faint hum of the old clock in the hallway keeps time just as it did when Grandma Doris used to sit by the window, sipping her tea. It's been 3 months since she passed. Peacefully in her sleep, in the same chair where she watched the seasons turn for so many years. Grandpa Robert's photograph still rests beside her favorite lamp, and the last book she was reading lies open on the table. A bookmark halfway through a chapter she never finished. I'm 19 now, and sometimes when the sun hits the porch just right, I can almost see her there. Smiling, content, her eyes soft with a wisdom the world can't teach. When Dad told me she'd left me something, I didn't expect much. But in her handwriting, neat and graceful, the note said, "For Emma, you are the keeper of our light." Inside these pages is every lesson I ever learned the hard way. Carry them gently. The box beneath the note was filled with her journals, each one covered in her delicate script. Stories of love, loss, courage, and forgiveness. Her words felt alive, as though she were sitting beside me, telling me everything she never had time to say aloud. I've started reading one entry every morning. She wrote about the pain she endured, yes, but also about laughter, resilience, and how she rebuilt her life from ashes. I cry sometimes, not out of sadness but pride. Dad visits often now. He's softer than I remember, more at peace. One day, as we sat in the garden she adored, he said, "You know, your grandma saved me, and I think she'll save others too through those journals." He's right. I've decided to publish them one day. Not for fame, but for the women who need to hear her voice, the way she once needed Brenda's. Every evening I water her roses, whispering the same words she once told me. Grow strong and bloom anyway. And somehow I swear they do. Sparkle's final reflection. Doris may be gone, but her story lives on. Not as tragedy but as light. And as long as her words are read, she'll never truly be silent. It took me nearly a year to read every page of Grandma's journals. Some entries made me laugh. Others made me cry so hard I had to stop and breathe. But each one taught me something new. Not just about her but about life itself. She didn't write like a victim. She wrote like someone who had finally met herself. Each page carried her voice, soft, steady, and certain. And the more I read, the more I realized her story wasn't just hers. It was mine too. It was every woman's story who ever gave too much of herself and learned, one painful day, to take it back. I decided to share it. I started small, a blog called The Light That Stayed. I posted excerpts from her journals, pairing them with photos from her garden. I expected maybe a handful of readers. But within weeks, messages poured in, from women, men, even teenagers, saying her words had touched something in them. "Your grandmother reminded me to set boundaries with love," one wrote. "Her story gave me the courage to leave," said another. Each message felt like a spark, and soon those sparks became a flame. One afternoon, a woman from a local magazine reached out. "Would you like to be featured?" she asked. "We think your grandmother's story could inspire so many." When the article came out, people began calling her the Rose Lady. Donations arrived from strangers wanting to support the community group she'd founded with Brenda. We used the funds to start a small foundation, the Doris Hill Center for Women's Renewal. At the opening ceremony, Dad stood beside me, tears glinting in his eyes. I stepped to the podium, clutching Grandma's worn notebook in my hands. "My grandmother once wrote," I said, voice trembling. "When one woman stands up for herself, she gives others permission to do the same." Today we carry that permission forward for her and for all of us. The room erupted in applause, but I didn't hear it. I was looking up at the sunlight streaming through the window, warm, golden, familiar. I imagined Grandma there, smiling quietly the way she always did when proud. Sparkle's final reflection. Her story began as survival and became strength. Now it's legacy, whispered from one generation to the next, proving that light never truly fades. It only changes hands. 2 years after launching the Doris Hill Center for Women's Renewal, I found myself standing on a stage much larger than I ever imagined, under the bright lights of a national conference about empowerment and resilience. I was 21 now. In the front row sat my father, hands folded, eyes proud. Behind him were rows of women, men, and students, people who had read Grandma's journals, who knew her name, her words, her courage. I took a breath and began. My grandmother never planned to change the world, I said. She just wanted peace in her own home. But sometimes peace, once found, refuses to stay small. A quiet murmur rippled through the room. I opened the small, worn notebook I always carried, Grandma's final journal, and read a few lines. Peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the choice to keep your heart soft even after it's been broken. For a moment there was silence. Then I looked up. Those words saved my father. They healed our family. And now they belong to you. I told them about the woman who had endured betrayal but found strength in stillness, about how she turned her suffering into light, then handed that light to others, and about how her legacy taught me that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, you can begin again. When I finished, the applause felt like a wave, not of noise but of gratitude. Afterward, people lined up just to touch her book, to tell me how her story had changed their lives. I realized then that Grandma's voice hadn't ended with her. It had multiplied. That evening, I returned home and walked into her old garden. The roses were in bloom, glowing faintly under the setting sun. I knelt beside them and whispered, "You did it, Grandma. You're still helping people." A breeze stirred, carrying the scent of lavender and earth, her favorite. And though I knew it was just the wind, I felt her there, steady and proud. I smiled, tracing a petal between my fingers. "I'll keep your light burning," I promised. "Always." Sparkle's final reflection. And so her story, born from pain, tempered by love and carried through generations, never truly ended. It became a living flame passed from heart to heart, reminding us all that even after darkness, the light always lives on. The first thing I remember about Great-Grandma Doris isn't her face. I never met her, but her voice. When I was little, Mom would read to me from an old book with a faded green cover. She'd say, "These are your great-grandmother's words, Lily. She wrote them when her heart was broken, but they helped her heal." I didn't understand then. I was too young to grasp what it meant to be broken and still brave. But her voice stayed with me, calm, wise, and steady. Now I'm 17, sitting in the same garden she once tended. The air smells of roses and lavender, just as Mom said it would. A gentle breeze brushes through the leaves, and for a moment, it feels like time has folded in on itself. Like she's still here, whispering through the petals. On the bench beside me lies one of her journals. The pages are yellowed, the ink faded, but the words are alive. There will always be storms. But remember, my dear, flowers don't wait for perfect weather. They bloom anyway. I traced those words with my fingers, letting them sink in. The world is loud now. Everyone shouting to be heard. Everyone pretending to be unbreakable. But reading her handwriting feels like taking a breath of quiet honesty. I started a social media page last month, Bloom Anyway. It's a place where people share stories of starting over, of finding light again after loss. I posted one of Doris's quotes, and it went viral overnight. Thousands of comments, messages from around the world. Mom cried when I told her. She'd be proud of you, she said. You're doing exactly what she did. Passing it forward. Maybe that's what legacy really is. Not statues or fame, but a seed, something planted quietly, that grows long after you're gone. I close the journal and look out at the garden. The roses sway softly in the wind, sunlight spilling over them in gold ribbons. And I know somehow that she'd be smiling. Thank you, I whisper, the words carried away by the breeze, for showing me how to bloom. Sparkle's final reflection. Her story began as survival, became strength, turned into legacy, and now it's renewal. The garden lives, the words endure, and the seed she planted keeps on growing. The Bloom Anyway page has grown far beyond anything I imagined. What started as a few posts about my great-grandmother's journals is now a community of thousands. We share stories, poems, even short voice notes from people learning to start again. Most days I just moderate quietly, But sometimes a message appears that feels like it was meant for me. Last week, a girl named Arya wrote, "I think I've ruined everything. My best friend stopped talking to me. My parents barely look at me. I don't see a point in trying anymore." Her words sat on the screen heavy and real. For a long moment I didn't know what to type. I'm only 17, what could I possibly say? Then I remembered a line from Grandma Doris's old notebook. "When you think the garden is gone, look closer. Something is always trying to grow." So I replied, "It's okay to feel lost. But lost isn't the same as finished. Let's look for what's still trying to grow." She answered an hour later. "Maybe writing," she said. "I used to like writing." We talked every few days after that about journaling, about small joys, about breathing through bad nights. Last night she posted a poem titled Roots on the page. It ended with the line, "Because someone reminded me that even in the dark, the seed is still alive." I cried when I read it. Not because it was sad, but because it sounded like Doris whispering through someone new. Mom saw the poem too. She hugged me and said, "That's how the light keeps moving, Lily. One hand reaching for another." Today I brought fresh soil for the garden. The roses are taller this year, and tiny buds are forming on the lavender. I planted a new sapling near the bench and placed a small plaque beneath it. "Bloom anyway, for every woman who chose to begin again." The wind picked up just then, scattering petals across the yard. I laughed through tears. It felt like all of them, Grandma Doris, Mom, and every woman she ever helped, were right there, cheering quietly from somewhere beyond. Sparkle's final reflection. "The world changes, but kindness never ages." Her words found me. Now they find others through me. And as long as one heart keeps reaching for another, her garden will never stop growing. I never knew who Doris Hill was. When I first stumbled onto the Bloom Anyway page, I was just another girl scrolling through her phone at 2 a.m., trying not to cry too loudly. I'd lost my best friend, failed my exams, and my parents barely spoke except to argue. Everything I touched seemed to fall apart. Then I saw a quote pinned to the top of the page. "When you think the garden is gone, look closer. Something is always trying to grow." I don't know why those words hit me so hard, but they did. I read them over and over until they didn't feel like someone else's advice. They felt like a hand reaching through the dark. A girl named Lily replied to one of my posts. She didn't tell me what to do, she just listened. Slowly, she taught me what her great-grandmother had learned decades before. That being broken isn't the end. It's the beginning of something new. She told me about Doris, a woman who had lost almost everything but found peace again in her own home. She sent me snippets from the journals, little pieces of courage written in looping cursive. Each line felt like sunlight through fog, so I started writing again. At first it was just small notes in my phone, fragments of thoughts I was too shy to share. Then I wrote a poem called Roots. When I posted it, hundreds of strangers commented. One wrote, "Your words helped me get through today." And suddenly, I understood what Lily meant by blooming anyway. A few weeks ago, I took a bus across town to visit the Doris Hill Center for Women's Renewal. I expected something formal, but it felt like a home warm, filled with laughter, and walls covered in paintings of flowers. On the back patio, a plaque read, "In every heart there's a seed, let it grow." I sat there for a long time, imagining her, Doris, sitting in her old garden, writing the words that would one day save me. Sparkle's final reflection. I never met her, yet she changed my life. That's what real legacy is. Not fame, not memory, but the quiet echo of kindness that keeps finding its way into new hands. 10 years have passed since the night I first read Doris Hill's words on a glowing phone screen. I'm 27 now. The world is still loud, messy, unpredictable. But somewhere inside that noise I've found my stillness. I run writing workshops at the Doris Hill Center for Women's Renewal. Every Saturday, the same scent of lavender drifts through the windows while a circle of women, young and old, tired and hopeful, fill the room with quiet courage. I start each session the same way. Take a breath, I say. You're safe here. You're growing, even if you can't see it yet. Some laugh, some cry. Every week, someone new whispers, I thought I was the only one. And every week I smile, remembering that I once said those exact words to Lily. She still visits sometimes with her daughter, a bright-eyed toddler who insists on watering the roses outside the building. Lily calls her Hope. I think Doris would have loved that. The old journals rest in a glass case near the entrance. The pages are fragile now, but the ink is strong. Every loop of handwriting a route that still anchors us. Visitors often stop to read a line or two before class. My favorite entry is the same one that found me all those years ago. There will always be storms. But flowers don't wait for perfect weather. They bloom anyway. When newcomers arrive, nervous and uncertain, I tell them about Doris, the woman who turned heartbreak into a garden, who taught her family that silence could become song. I tell them that legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about helping someone else remember their own strength. Sometimes, after everyone leaves, I walk into the courtyard. The roses are taller now, reaching past the fence toward the sky. The plaque beneath them reads, "Bloom anyway, for every soul who dared to begin again." I kneel to pull a stray weed and whisper, "We're still blooming, Doris." The evening light falls across the petals, golden and endless. For a moment I swear the air hums, soft like a voice carried on the wind, reminding me that this was never just her story. It's ours. Sparkle's final reflection. From Doris to Emma to Lily to me, the circle never broke. The garden keeps growing, the words keep traveling, and the light she planted will shine wherever someone chooses to begin again. It's been 25 years since the first seed of Bloom Anyway was planted, and the garden has long outgrown its fences. The center now partners with schools, shelters, and community programs around the country. Every spring we host a festival called the Day of Blooming. Not to sell flowers, but to share stories. People arrive carrying notebooks, guitars, old photographs. They set up small booths with signs that read, "I began again," or "This is my bloom." Some stand trembling as they tell their stories for the first time. Others simply listen, tears shining in their eyes. I still run the opening circle, though the hair at my temples has turned silver. When the crowd quiets, I always read the same line from Doris's journal. Strength is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to keep planting even when you doubt the sun will return. Every time I speak those words, I look out at faces that span generations, teenagers, grandmothers, fathers holding babies, and I feel the air shift as if she's there among us, smiling that small, knowing smile. After the festival each year, we gather at the old center garden. The original rosebush still blooms, its stems twisted with age but heavy with color. Children paint smooth stones with words like hope, peace, and begin. We place them at the base of the roses until the ground looks like a mosaic of light. I've come to understand something Doris probably knew all along. Healing isn't a finish line. It's a thread that runs through time, hand to hand, heart to heart, carried by anyone brave enough to keep it moving. Tonight, as dusk settles, I lock the center and walk toward the garden gate. The sky is the color of soft embers, the air thick with the scent of earth after rain. I whisper a quiet thank you, not just to Doris, but to every soul who dared to tell the truth of their own blooming. In the distance, laughter rises from the courtyard. Someone is reciting a poem. Someone else hums an old tune. And I realize the world has become her garden now, vast, imperfect, endlessly alive. Sparkle's final reflection. The story of Doris Hill never really ended. It simply opened, spreading root and light wherever courage takes hold. And as long as someone, somewhere, chooses to bloom anyway, her garden will never die. No one knows exactly when the words began to travel farther than the garden. But one morning they were simply everywhere. A teacher in a quiet town started her class each day with "Bloom Anyway." A nurse wrote the phrase on a hospital whiteboard beside the day's date. A street artist painted it beneath a mural of open hands releasing petals into the wind. The world had changed since Doris first wrote those lines. Screens had replaced letters. Voices echoed through devices instead of rooms. Yet her message fit perfectly. In every language it found, it meant the same thing: keep growing. At the center's archives, the journals now rest in climate-safe glass, their ink still bright after a century. Visitors trace the looping handwriting with reverence, as if touching a living root. School groups come through on field trips. Children carry notebooks home, eager to start their own stories. Each year on the Day of Blooming, thousands gather in parks and gardens around the world. They plant seeds, share poems, and read aloud from the book that began it all. Some know the whole history. Others just know the feeling, that quiet strength rising inside when life asks for courage. In one city square, a young boy kneels beside his grandmother to place a rose in the soil. He asks, Why do we do this every year? She smiles. Because someone long ago reminded us that light always finds a way back. When evening comes, lanterns are released into the sky, tiny moving stars drifting upward. Each carries a handwritten wish. Heal, forgive, begin again. And as they float higher, the crowd falls silent, the same hush that once filled a single small garden. Somewhere in that hush, you can almost hear her voice, soft, steady, eternal. Even now, even here, bloom. Sparkle's final reflection. From one woman's whispered truth to countless hearts across the world. The circle is complete. The garden is no longer one place. It's everywhere courage takes root. And as long as a single seed dares to reach for the sun, the story of Doris Hill will keep unfolding. In every beginning that starts again. Tulip the End, Bloom Anyway chronicles the world in bloom.